Yep, coming down.
We have a rather loud family, so thank you for coming. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Alsop. He is a former Wall Street Journal editor and writer. At the Wall Street Journal, one of his jobs was to do a ranking that occurs in business schools. And I think he's going to touch on that today as well. He's also an author of several books. The one that perhaps caught our attention the most is Trophy Kids Grow Up, How the Millennial Generation is Shaping Up the Workforce, Workplace, the right title. And he also has books on business school rankings and on corporate reputation as well. He does a lot of speaking and consulting with large corporations. And so he's going to come and share some of his knowledge with us today. And I'd like to welcome Mr. Arnold. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Hope this mic works well. If you guys can't hear me, let me know. Is that on?
And I should mention that the wireless mic grid doesn't work, and so unfortunately we got to choose them together.
So can you all hear me? Yes, okay. Anyway, thank you, Sharon, for the nice introduction. Before we start, I do my presentations two different ways. One, sometimes I just present the whole presentation and ask these questions, and sometimes I got people, if something really resonates with you, that you want to ask about it, feel free to raise your hand. I'll see you, but I don't mind, having some interaction during the presentation, keep it lively. So I may even ask you guys a question or two along the way. So as Sharon said, when I was at the Wall Street Journal, one of my jobs was to create our business school ranking. Now that was MBA level only, so it didn't affect Northern Colorado. But I also wrote a business school column, which cut across undergraduate and graduate level business schools. And it was one of those columns that led to this book. What happened was I had started hearing more and more about the Millennial Generation when I went to business schools, because what was happening was your generation was just reaching the traditional MBA age, which is around 25 or so. And these MBA programs were taken aback by your generation. They said, we haven't ever seen students like this before. And I said, how so? So they started talking to me about what some of the differences were between millennials and other generations they had put through their schools. And so I started talking to our recruiters about your generation as well. And I wrote a column for the Wall Street Journal about I think the first sentence was, the millennials are coming. And I remember I was actually making some business school people nervous about how they were going to adapt or deal with this generation. And after the story ran in the paper, I got so many emails from people at schools, employers, parents, millennials, about my article. And what struck me wasn't just the volume of response, but the passionate responses. In other words, everybody really had a strong opinion, pro or con, about some of the things I had written about the millennials. So I decided there was a lot more here to explore, and ended up writing a book proposal, and finally sold it to John Wiley, and the result was this book, which was published about a year ago. And since then, I've spoken to lots of companies, business schools, and conferences about the book and about things I've learned about the generation since the book came out. So this is probably nothing new to you, but often for older audiences, I have to sort of define what the millennial generation is with a few broad strokes. I also want to say right now, too, that not everything I'm going to say about millennials applies to everybody in your generation. Some of it you may relate to you personally, some of it you may see in your friends and classmates, but I don't think every attribute fits any one person. Though I did speak at the University of California at Berkeley to an organizational behavior class a few weeks ago, and after my presentation, one student came up to me and said, "That's me. You told everything about me in your presentation." He said, there was one thing he said, "I don't think my parents are true helicopter parents, but other than that, everything fit me." So, anyway, because I've had other young people so challenge me that they don't feel that they are the way I describe the millennial generation. And I've also interviewed some millennials who will say after they make a comment, "Gee, that sounded so millennial of me." So, anyway. These are some of the characteristics. Basically, it's young people born in the 80s and 90s. There are two demographers, Strauss and Howell, who wrote a book called Millennials Rising, and they were really the first, as far as I don't know if they coined the word millennial generation. I could never find that. So in my book, I just said they popularized the word millennial generation. But they basically defined it in terms of these years. There's some people who talk about Generation Y, which certainly is either the same or overlaps millennials a lot in terms of the years of birth. I think your generation in general has pretty high self-esteem. Obviously, technology is your strongest point. In terms of career priorities, a lot of the young people I interviewed for my book said it was most important to them to get personal development at a company. In other words, they wanted to feel they were developing their skills, they were moving ahead as fast as their talents allowed. And they weren't loyal to any one company. They felt that they would spend so much time at one company to build their skills as much as possible and move on. Nobody planned to spend their life or even 10 years at a company that I interviewed. Work-life balance, I think, is one of the highest priorities of this generation. Which is a good thing, although you can only go so far, obviously, because the job has to get done, too. And one thing I heard from so many young people was that they want jobs that they feel are meaningful to them in some way, that either in terms of giving back to society or just personally they feel that they're doing something to them that's worthwhile. And then finally, the helicopter parents, I think, are one of the most important aspects of why millennials are the way they are. And I felt they were so important that of the 11 chapters in my book, I devote 2 of those chapters to parents. So if there's any one thing that I think defines the generation, at least from the perspective of the older generations, it's a sense of entitlement. That older people, whether they're professors or employers, feel that your generation has incredibly great expectations, which sounds good. I mean, it's good to be ambitious, but that sometimes they get to be unrealistic. The millennial generation in general has been a very accomplished one, reached a very high level of education as a generation. One business school dean I interviewed said, "It's the most credentials-driven generation he's ever seen." And he went on to tell me about a set of parents who emailed him an Excel spreadsheet that chronicled their child's accomplishments from preschool all the way through high school. So, and so it gets back to the title of my book, The Trophy Kid. This generation is the one where everybody got a trophy, everybody got rewarded, no matter how well you played or participated in an event. In other words, you could hit a home run and get a trophy, you could sit on the bench and you get the same trophy. So there was this feeling of getting rewarded, sometimes just for showing up. And then the other sense of the word in my title, Trophy Kids, is that I think a lot of parents view their children as trophies, that they want to be the best parents they can, they want to be as involved and give their kids as much as they possibly can, which can sometimes be excessive. And so those are the 2 meanings of my title. One of the biggest criticisms I hear from managers is that millennials have no patience for paying their dues. I especially hear this from Gen Xers, even more than baby boomers, that millennials want to move ahead at an unusually fast pace. They want to be given meaningful jobs right off the bat. They don't want to do work that they consider drudgery. So that they really want to feel important from the first day on the job. And some companies are trying to do that in different ways, but clearly every job has its outdoor aspects, and managers are finding it hard sometimes to get millennials to accept assignments that may not be exactly what they want to do. I interviewed a man at Merrill Lynch who was a graduate of Duke University, and he was about 25 at the time, and he was on the way to being a managing director, and he said that what bothered him at Merrill Lynch was that there was sort of this unwritten rule that you had to be there about a dozen years or more to become a managing director, and he didn't feel that was fair. What he wanted was a true meritocracy, meaning that he wanted to be able to advance as fast as his accomplishments allowed, so that if in 5 years he had done so many great deals for Merrill Lynch, they should make him a managing director. And he went so far as to say in front of someone from his company that if he's not able to advance as fast as he would like, he'll move on to another manager. So there's, as I said, a high self-esteem here. Also, sometimes the impatience of this generation is a bit too much for companies. And finally, some companies say that they feel your generation doesn't have the proper boundaries, meaning that there's a feeling that you can go up to the CEO and talk to them as if they were just another coworker. There's not a respect for the traditional corporate hierarchy. And to older generations, this is not something they want to see. Some recruiters I met at a conference a while ago talked about student stalkers. And what they meant by that were students, instead of dealing with the recruiters on campus, if they didn't feel they were getting where they wanted in terms of getting a job with their company, they would go over their head and email a senior executive, maybe even the CEO, and try to impress them. And they were so insistent on getting a job that they really ruined their chances by being inappropriate and not going through the proper channels. So the things that millennials want, I think this is probably one of the most important things in terms of the workplace. They want flexible lives. More than once I heard the expression that work isn't a place you go to, it's what you do. Which meant I could do the job anywhere, anytime, just as long as I get it done. And there's one company that seems to buy into that, which is Best Buy. Their headquarters, a good share of their headquarters staff in the Minneapolis area is allowed to sort of set their own hours and work from home or remotely from wherever, for the most part. They may have to come into the headquarters for meetings, but in general, they are given a flexible work routine. They call it results-only work environment. And it seemed to, at least from the young people I talked to, seemed to be exactly what they wanted. One young man I interviewed and write about in my book says he'll take 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon to go exercise, but then he'll work at night at home on his laptop. And he doesn't have to go to the office much, doesn't have to go to a lot of meetings, which he considers a waste of time, and that he feels he's much more efficient this way. Now, most companies are far from that point, but I do think more companies are thinking about this as millennials demand more attention to their personal lives. All generations, baby boomers, Gen Xers, have wanted more balance in their lives between work and home, but I think the millennials will really force the issue more, and to me that is a good thing. I think they always have to keep in mind that the job has to be done, the client has to be served, the company has to make money, but within that broad goal, if the company can give them more flexibility, that's all for the better, I think. One of the biggest complaints I heard from companies was those ubiquitous iPods everywhere. They talked about young people coming into work with their iPods plugged in and not being able to hear what's going on around them, not paying attention in meetings sometimes. I think it was one of the most frustrating things I found in my research. There was one young woman who worked at a bank in Wall Wall Street who said she'd pay $20 a day if she could wear blue jeans to work. So this casual, desire for a casual work environment is something too that is important to this generation, and yet most companies, while they might have business casual, they certainly are far from wanting people to come to work in jeans and flip-flops. So these are some of the basic things that I think this generation sometimes doesn't have when they go into the workplace. They don't realize what sort of the basic customs and norms are for the workplace. And we were talking earlier, some of the professors and I said, I think this is something that schools can help young people prepare better for the workplace so that they do understand that as much as they might want to have a fun, flexible workplace, they still have to abide by certain customs of that workplace, that culture. When I spoke at a conference in California earlier this year, a manager from a construction management company came up to me and said that she thought this epitomized the Millennial Generation's attitude. She had a young woman working for her, and she said she needed to walk her dog twice a day. And the manager said, well, you won't always have that flexibility to leave twice a day. So she quit because she said, my job is interfering with my life. So again, that may be an extreme case, but I think the idea that life is just as important as work is a key aspect of the millennials. Another thing I hear a lot, both at schools and at companies, is that your generation needs an incredible amount of feedback and a lot of direction and checklists. Some people call you praise junkies, but you've gotten a lot of pats on the back and still need that to do well at school or work. When I interviewed a French professor at Dartmouth, she said that she had a reputation for being a tough grader, and that anybody who enrolled in her class should know that. But she said the students really, increasingly, the students are taking offense at her harsh comments, her tough grading policies, and it got to the point where a young woman came in and said, can't you sometimes say something nice about us in our papers? And she handed her a smiley face stamp and said, you just stamp that smiley face on our papers when you see something you'd like. It would make me feel so much better. So, at any rate, these are the things that are sort of driving professors crazy. Now, in terms of feedback, a lot of the young people I talked to, these were accomplished people at companies like IBM and Ernst & Young, they said that one reason they like all this feedback is because they don't want to have surprises at their performance review. They want to know right off that they're not doing well or they're not doing something just right. And they also want a lot of praise. They said they really do need that positive feedback to stay motivated. At a big pharmaceutical company in New Jersey, one manager had to ask a young employee why he didn't finish his project on time, and his response was, you forgot to remind me. So that really took him aback, but again, I think this generation, because of the way maybe schools were when they attended elementary, high school, and now college, they got a lot of reminders of when things were due, and they still expect that in the workplace, which most companies are definitely not prepared to do. On a more serious note than that, I think, is what I found a lot of companies telling me, which was that they find millennials are uncomfortable with taking risks and making independent decisions, that there's not a lot of tolerance for ambiguity, when things are sort of gray and it's not so clear what decision to make in a business situation, and yet that's really what business is often all about, ambiguity. So I think if you can start thinking that way more, it would be a real help when you get into the workplace to really be able to take a situation where there isn't a clear-cut answer and figure it out on your own without asking for a lot of guidance from your boss. Some people think this has come from a lot of teamwork and collaboration in schools through the years, and that young people prefer to work in teams where there's a consensus of the team rather than do something independently and make your own decisions. Now, in my research on what the dream jobs of your generation are, sort of some conflicting things in a way. Some people talked about wanting to make a lot of money, partly to pay back their student loans, but just they wanted to have comfortable lives, so that meant some of these really grueling jobs in consulting, banking, and accounting where you really put in long hours. And that obviously conflicts with the generation's desire for work-life balance. Clearly, the company that more people want to work for in your generation than any other is Google. I think it's because of the culture there, where they sort of blend work and life together. You've probably read stories about Google at their headquarters out in California. They have all these services right there at the workplace for you, so you really can almost live there. And the blending of work and personal life seems to be something that appeals to millennials, and Google epitomizes that. A lot of people in your generation say they'd like to work for nonprofits and government agencies. I think there's a segment of millennials who are entrepreneurial and want to be their own bosses. They say they want to set their own hours, even if they're long hours, they want to be in control of their lives. And finally, your generation wants to work for companies that are good corporate citizens, that are socially and environmentally responsible. There's a company called Universum that does an annual survey where they ask both undergraduates and MBA students who their ideal employers would be. And this is this year's list for undergraduates. So this isn't just business undergraduates. This would be all undergraduates. And you see there are a fair number of nonprofits and government agencies on the list, which is interesting, as a few big companies. But the MBA list will be very different. It's very corporate, no nonprofits, no government agencies there. Clearly, MBAs are preparing for high-powered careers at big companies. But both pick Google as their top choice for an employer. So, one of the biggest challenges recruiters told us in a survey I did when I was still at the Wall Street Journal, Harris Interactive and the Wall Street Journal did an annual survey of corporate recruiters, upon which we based our rankings of business schools, but also we gained a lot of insights into what recruiters want in graduates. And in the last survey I did, I wanted to get into the Millennial Generation issue because I know I was writing this book, so we asked them whether it was more difficult to retain millennials, and they overwhelmingly said yes, it is, that there's too much job hopping, not enough loyalty. Again, this was before the recession. Obviously, there's not much job hopping right now, but clearly it was, and maybe again, a tendency of millennials. If they don't find exactly what they're looking for in their employer, they tend to leave rather quickly, which is a big challenge for companies because they invest a lot of money in both recruiting and training new employees. So to lose somebody after 6 months is a big deal. We asked the recruiters what their perceptions of millennials are, and these are some of the comments we got in our survey. So it reflects some of the things I've talked about. I'd say if I had to characterize the responses from I think we had about 3,000 recruiters respond to the survey, I'd say at least 2/3 of the responses tended to be on the more negative side, more the lazier, more entitled type comments. We also asked more generally about what recruiters really would like to see. And this is again business school graduates, and these were the attributes in our list that the recruiters said were the most important to them. And in all the years I did the survey, which was I guess 7 or 8 years, communication and interpersonal skills was always number one. And this was also the thing they often found hardest to find in business school graduates, that this was one of their weaknesses, was their communication skills, and yet it was to them the most important thing to bring to the workplace. is working well in a team is important. I think ethics and integrity, I saw that rise in the ranking of importance through the years, especially after all the scandals with Millenial and all that. Analytical problem-solving skills, strong work ethic, which is something a lot of employers question whether the millennials have, a good fit with their corporate culture, leadership potential, strategic thinking, and then just being a well-rounded individual. And we asked them what were the key leadership characteristics they looked for. And I thought it was interesting, being honest and trustworthy was most important. And when we asked them how well, again, this was focused on MBAs, how well MBAs are in terms of these leadership attributes, they gave them high marks for teamwork and articulating and accomplishing what they set out to do, but lower grades for honesty and trustworthiness, motivating and inspiring others, and caring about others. And when we asked them what was, again, very important to them in terms of new hires, they cited adaptability to change as a key distinguishing trait. 9 out of 10 said they're increasingly seeking students who are versatile and adaptable. They want people who, again, this gets back to that issue of ambiguity, who can deal with a lot of change, a lot of uncertainty. And what are their pet peeves when they go out to recruit at business schools? Again, it's this presentation, written communication skills is probably their biggest complaint. Some think that students learn in what they call silos, meaning they learn a lot about finance, so they learn a lot about marketing, but they don't know how all these different academic disciplines intertwine in the workplace. So they don't have this big picture management perspective. They find that there's too little work experience sometimes previous to their graduating. Unprepared for interviews, the attitudes, again, this is more about MBAs. The MBA arrogance is a common trait for a long time, I think. They find business schools have too few women and U.S. minorities. And when they say too many international students, it isn't that they don't want to hire international students, it's hard. There are only so many international students they're able to sponsor to get visas, work visas for. And so they find some schools have so many international students that they know they can only get work visas for so few that the business school is disproportionately international, and they can't hire them because they just can't keep them in the U.S. Now, more and more recruiters are realizing that the place where they have to find millennials is in cyberspace. And so they're working, I think, pretty diligently to improve their career websites, to make them a bit more interactive, more interesting, and more videos of young employees talking about what it's like to work at the company. Some employers will even allow certain times where they'll be on there for instant messaging with potential recruits, so that they don't have to wait for answers. Social networking, some are going on social networks. On the websites, these are the things I think companies are emphasizing more, trying to appeal to millennials. Career development, work-life balance, diversity, the opportunity to do community service, and as I said, more videos. I think they've realized that email is not something millennials deal with as much as older generations, that they prefer texting or instant messaging. And then the social networking sites, or the pure recruiting sites, Ernst & Young, I believe, was the first company to go on Facebook with a recruiting site. And there was a lot of debate within the company about whether to do this because they were giving up some control of the space by going on Facebook and letting anybody comment on the site that wanted to. But they sort of decided early on that other than offensive comments or inappropriate language, they weren't going to censor the comments, so that if you go look at Ernst & Young's Facebook site, you'll see they allow some negative comments about the company and about the accounting industry to stay there. And they felt that it was a way to stand out from other companies and be more in tune with what the younger generation was doing in terms of Facebook and other social networking sites. U.S. Army, I think, is probably on almost all the social networking sites now. And KPMG, as far as I know, was the first company to set up a recruiting site on YouTube, which again they felt was a fresh way to break through the clutter of recruiters. And there are other connections companies are making to try to appeal to millennials. Some companies, such as JP Chase and Google and Goldman Sachs, have partnered with Teach for America because they were finding that one of their toughest competitors on campus wasn't other companies, it was Teach for America. And so many undergraduates wanted to go and spend a couple of years teaching in inner city schools before they started working. And that they set up partnerships where you might get hired by JP Chase, but they'll give you 2 years to go teach before you come work for them. And I think JP Chase, at least early on, they were actually even giving you a signing bonus up front before you started your teaching. So, so they really felt that was a way to appeal millennials. Some say they search blogs and career sites looking for good fits for their companies. Some companies have these games, like L'Oreal, I think is most notable. They have both an MBA and an undergraduate business competition. It's international, and it's like a game. It's all online, and then eventually they bring the winners to Paris for the final competition. But for them, they've told me it's really more, while the students learn a lot, it's more a recruiting tool for the company. And it gives them a chance to spot talent. And finally, this surprised me when I interviewed people at Deloitte. They said that they're reaching out to younger and younger people promoting the accounting business, and they're giving out these journals about finding careers to people as young as middle school age, because they claim that young people are starting to decide what career they want to pursue at an earlier age than ever. Now, I mentioned the helicopter parent phenomenon. What's most disturbing about it isn't just that the parents stay involved during the college years, which I know a lot of people at this college and every college could find a bit disturbing and annoying, but it's that they're actually staying involved once young people graduate from college and go looking for work. I would say every company I interviewed told me of at least one case where they had parents want to come in and sit in on the job interview with the student. FedEx said not only did they get parents asking to come to the job interview, the parents wanted FedEx to pay their travel expenses to get there. So it's sort of amazing how parents are staying involved in their kids' lives and probably hurting their chances in some cases of even getting hired. Now, some companies are taking an approach where they don't want to alienate the parents because they feel they'll alienate their prospective recruits. So a few companies such as Merrill Lynch and Ultimate Public Relations actually have parent days where they let the parents come into the workplace and spend the day so they can see what it's like for their children to work there. And I'd say a fair number of companies are developing materials about their benefits and compensation plans specifically for parents. Ernst & Young has a memory stick that they give recruits, and they say this is for your parents, because they know the parents are going to be very involved in the decision. And some companies have web pages for parents as well. Now finally, as I said, I wrote my book before the recession hit, so things are changing a lot. I think this has been a huge wake-up call for your generation. I think it's the first, certainly it's the first major economic upheaval you've seen, and for many young people who've been used to working hard and getting what they wanted as a reward, it's really unnerving to them now to find that they can't find work. When I was out at Berkeley, they were telling me in the MBA program that a lot of young people come there and they'll say, what courses do I need to take to get this particular job? And they tell them, well, there is no magic formula to get that particular job. There are certain courses you need, but we can't guarantee you're going to get a job. But they say the mentality of a lot of the young people is that if I do all these things right, I'm going to get what I want. And now, obviously, that isn't happening. Some more young people are having to move back home. I think their parents have lost jobs. Certainly, there's less job hopping because the jobs aren't there. And unfortunately, for the ones who are entrepreneurial-oriented, I think credit is so tight that it's hard for some young people to try to start their own businesses. I believe there's even more of a move toward nonprofit government jobs, even if they aren't paying much, just to get the experience, which I think would be a good thing rather than sitting home. To me, the most positive outcome of this recession for the Millennial Generation would be if it made their expectations more realistic about the workplace and about the kinds of jobs they could expect to get and what they should do on the job. It made them more resilient and not as willing to leave at the drop of a hat if the job didn't prove to be what it was advertised to be. And finally, to be more flexible themselves in working with their managers to try to get some of the things they want, but realize they can't have everything. But I do think no matter how long it takes the job market to improve, that once the economy is better, that I think the millennials' basic values will still be intact. I think they'll still want work-life balance, they'll still want a diverse workplace, and they'll still want to do meaningful work. So I think those are all good things, as long as young people keep it in perspective and don't expect too much too soon. But when I did my research for the book, I was impressed by young people and how open and they just seemed to really be able to express themselves well, what they wanted in life, and they were very open about it. Even, as I said, in the one case, the employer might have been sitting right by them, but they would still say, well, I'm going to go back to law school in a few years. So there was this confidence and openness, and I admired them for that. And I also admired the millennials I talked to for their desire to make the world a better place. While I think other generations have had a desire to do altruistic things, I think this generation is much more committed than ever to doing things that will be of social and environmental value. So I applaud millennials for that. So I think on that note, I'm going to stop talking myself, and hopefully I stimulated some questions for some of you about this, and maybe some debate about whether you think this is an accurate depiction of your generation. So any questions? Comments?
Do you think that some of the millennial generation, I guess, for how we grew up in like the teaching environment? Because I know that when I was in middle school and high school and everything, in elementary school, if you did bad on something, your parents were involved, and so you had to get parent signatures. And it's all with the schooling, and also with the idea that you brought up that we want set rules and the whole ambiguous idea of us we can make decisions, but we would rather have like set rules and somebody else's approval. That could also come from just how we were in school, because we always have this is right, this is wrong. And so I know I'm always like, oh, so this is wrong. I want somebody else's approval because I'm getting it wrong. Instead of, well, this is right, and this is the other track you could have taken, but on this track you take like more of that instead of just right and wrong.
Well, I think definitely, I think schools have encouraged some of these traits. I can only speak from my own experience as a parent. I have a 16-year-old son, and went through the public schools in our town. And one thing that I noticed more as he got into, especially in the middle school, high school, is what I guess in the education world is called a rubric. I don't know if you guys know what a rubric is. I didn't know what a rubric was. They didn't have one. Anyway, but he always, for every paper or assignment, even in honors level classes, he brings home this checklist of exactly what they expect in the paper, as well as sometimes they'll even say how many points they're going to get for different parts of the paper in terms of the grade. And it's like, it is a checklist. and he's gotten this throughout his school career pretty much. And I think that's made him very dependent on, meeting exact directions. Instead of the teacher saying, I want you to go write a paper on the Scarlet Letter and explore a theme of such and such, and then let him do it. They give this long list. Your paper needs to have, we want to see some, if it's a more creative paper, we want to see metaphors, we want to see something, we want to see, it's just so programmed. So that part of school, I agree. As far as parents involved in the school, some of the parents I interviewed for my book, they said they find it hard to let go when their kids enter college because they've been told by society and by their school districts to be as involved as possible with their kids. So that meant volunteering in school, going to PTA meetings, knowing what their kids were reading in school and doing. So they got so involved, which was a good thing at that point. They said it's not fair that colleges expect us to just sort of walk away and let our kids do everything on their own. So I'm not saying that's the right approach. Obviously, at your age, you need to start being more independent. But I think the schools have encouraged in different ways some of these behaviors, for sure.
What can the millennial generation do to make themselves more attractive in the job market? Is there like a few quick fixes, or is there like we have to fix everything at once to really make ourselves more marketable in the job market?
Well, I think, I touched on some of the things they value most recruiters. I really do think working on your interpersonal skills is important. I watch my son and his friends, and they never talk to each other on the phone. They're always texting, and that may seem like a little thing, but when you don't talk to people face to face or even on the phone, I think it starts. There's just not a development of interpersonal skills. There are a lot of managers and parents complain about young people texting them when they could easily walk over and spoken to them in person. And I think you're missing something by not learning how to listen to people, how to interact, be articulate, read body language. So I think that would be one important thing when you go into an interview to get better at. And I can't overemphasize writing skills. I know you get used to these texts and emails that you're not very careful about how you write them, but when you start working for a company, you've got to be able to do very formal writing. And so those two areas. Beyond that, the ambiguity issue, I think we talked about that with professors and I, about ways professors can help students deal with situations where there isn't this clear cut of the answer. There isn't necessarily a right answer, and to be able to deal with a lot of information and come up with a solution, even if it's not necessarily the perfect solution. So those would be some of the things I would say. Because you're going to get, if you go into an interview with, say, a consulting firm, they're going to test you on how you deal with sort of some of these more ambiguous situations. Anybody else?
Actually, we were just wondering, how long is it going to take the baby boomer generation to get out of the workplace, and then what do you think the effects are going to be when it's been? Are we going to kind of go into this? I don't know. I was kind of thinking that we were talking about, like Southern Europe kind of has those 2-hour lunch breaks where they kind of go hang out and beaches and whatever, and then go back to work 2 or 3.
That's a good question. I mean, I can't predict for sure. But I mean, some people might say the inmates running the asylum, but I don't think it'll be like that. I do think that on the positive side, as I said, I think hopefully your generation and the Gen X people will be, I guess, ahead of you still in terms of their senior management. But I would hope that the work-life balance within reason becomes more a reality in the workplace. And I think your generation could drive that. I'm hoping that by the time you reach leadership positions that you'll have good mentors in companies who will help you along the way. Some companies are doing more mentoring and what they call reverse mentoring, where they again, this is a way to make young people feel valued and important. Young people mentor older people, usually on technology skills. So I think hopefully there will be a lot of boomers leave. I think it's going to be later and later because of all the damage that was done to retirement plans in the stock market. And just in general, housing prices down. I mean, a lot of people counted on all that for their retirement. I think they're going to have to work longer, so that may be a disappointment to some of you. The baby boomers are going to be around probably longer than you might have been expected. I don't have a slide in this presentation, but I do in one of my others today where I was trying to show the conflict between the generations. And after my article in the journal, I got an email from a 63-year-old man who was saying that he pitied the companies and schools that had to put up with these spoiled young brats. And then there was a comment on the Wall Street Journal's law blog from a millennial saying that he wished the baby boomers would just hurry up and die. So there clearly is some generational hostility happening right now.
How do you think that the double date syndrome throughout the world has kind of affected this as far as it's difficult for single parents to go into the workplace rather than have to stay at home and take care of their children? So working at home jobs is more common. How do you think that's affected the millennial generation?
I wasn't sure the first part of what you said.
The double day, it's the idea of, it's more common for women, but it's the idea of working an 8-hour shift and then coming home and taking care of the house.
Oh, yeah, I hadn't heard that. Okay. So you're saying more women are trying to work from home, which I think is true, or some women who are in higher powered jobs, they're taking time off and their companies are trying to figure out ways they can get back in when they're ready to come back from the workforce. So the millennials, I think there'll be more and more of that. Working remotely from home for a company, or at least maybe having some days a week where they work at home, if not every day. I think companies are already moving that way in general, but I would think millennials, especially if they do get in positions of authority, will accelerate that trend for sure. It was funny when I was doing my book and interviewing young people, a lot talked about work-life balance being important, but they were talking about more from personal desires, like wanting to have time to be with their friends, exercise, that sort of thing, not from a parenting standpoint. But there were a few of the women who did say that they would never work for a company that didn't give them a balanced life once they had children. So again, I think with the millennials, it's going to be a matter of if you're really determined to get this more than the other generation has been. So I think it will move in that direction.
Can you expand on the idea of helicopter parents?
Oh yeah, I didn't deal with that too much because the focus was recruiting. But as I said, I devoted 2 chapters to them. So do you know what I mean by helicopter?
Not very well.
Okay. Well, the term has been around a little while now. Basically what it means, why they call them helicopter parents, is because they hover, like a helicopter hovers, so they hover over their children. And when I did the book, I interviewed probably about 30 parents, and whenever I mentioned the word helicopter parents in the interview, almost every one of them would say, I am not a helicopter parent, but I do this and this and this and this for my child. So at the end, I obviously concluded they were helicopter. There was only one man I interviewed who was actually he was an engineer for Chevron, and he said, I am a helicopter parent, and I'm proud of it. And talked about all the things he did for his son, helping him get ready to go. He was there to Texas A&M. And it was just amazing. And a lot of the parents, there was one woman, she's a physician in Orlando. She talked about how she was a Cuban-American woman, and she said when she was young, her parents didn't care anything. They didn't keep track of her. She could have been anywhere. They just didn't pay attention to her. So she decided she was going to be just the opposite and really give her kids everything. So even now that her son is at William and Mary, he's still, every semester, she said he picks a list of courses he's considering taking for the next semester. He emails her the list, and she decides what he should take. So these are parents who stay very involved. They call professors and complain about grades. They sometimes try to sit in on admission interviews at schools. I talked about them in the workplace. And basically, I think they drive teachers crazy for the most part because they're so intense. But I went into the book thinking that the were way over the top, which some of them certainly are. But after I interviewed a lot of them, I was a little more sympathetic because of what I said earlier, that they said it's just really hard to let go, that we've been so involved in their lives that it's painful for us. And that some of them even acknowledge that they probably should back off more, but they really find it a hard habit to break. So do any of you have what I would call helicopter parents? That's not too many, actually. So most of you feel that your parents let you pretty much be on your own and make your own decisions. One thing I found curious was the young people I interviewed, a lot of them seemed to be very friendly with their parents and they liked the support, which that's okay, I guess. But they were in touch with their parents almost daily, if not more than once a day, by texts or cell phone calls. Because when I went to college, I called them maybe once every 10 days or so. That was pre-cell phone, but still, that was fine. My parents were fine with that, just so they kept in touch to a degree. But this constant connection, I think, is another reason that parents stay so involved. Any stories about your parents that are interesting?
My first semester of your record, we called him every day.
Right. So I think that's very common. It's not, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I think it does make this bond, keep this bond strong longer than maybe is always the best for people becoming more independent and making their own decisions. A lot of colleges are adding a message about this at their orientation for parents when the freshmen arrive on campus. They're saying things about, we want you, we know it's hard for you, they say it gently, but we want you to start letting your children make their own mistakes. If they have a roommate problem, let them try to deal with it. If they have a grading problem, let them deal with it. So they're trying to clearly get the message across that that parents should start backing away. One university in New Jersey, Seton Hall University, near where I live, I lived here and spent some time, and I interviewed the woman who handles their orientation, and she says she tells parents that it's time to be a coach now, not a cruise director, and to let them make more decisions. And she always ends, she says, by saying, "I'll see you all at graduation," which of course is just wishful thinking, because the university has a parent website. In fact, after she saw that, when she told me they did this, I was sort of like, well, is this a mixed signal you're getting? But they actually do this. They have the parents and the freshmen, they created some sort of a thing that's like a Build-A-Bear workshop. You know what those are? And the parents and the kid and their child, they build a bear, and they put a T-shirt on it that says, "Someone loves you at Seton Hall." It has the website address for parents, and the parents take the bear home with them. What do you think of that, Sharon? So it's like I asked the people at Merrill Lynch about their parents' day too. I said, "So are you encouraging helicopter parenting by doing this?" And they said, "Well, maybe, but it gives us a competitive advantage over Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley or some of our competitors in recruiting these young people." So, back there?
Does our staying connected as millennials, we're always connected to something, is that sort of bad in the workplace? Is there a need for a separation between what you do at work and sort of how we are not at work?
Yeah, I think in the general, employers don't want you on Facebook or doing a lot of personal texting or emailing with your friends, for sure. I know one manager I interviewed said that one young woman did online shopping every day at work, and she told him it helped her relax and do a better job. And he, of course, did not buy that. But no, I mean, companies, especially right now, they're trying to get as much productivity out of their workers as they can, so you really don't appreciate that. On the other hand, some companies, this is primarily, I found, in the technology industry, companies like IBM, they have a lot of social networking within the company. Deloitte too, they established a social network so that employees can network and send messages to each other. So I think that's appealing. But as far as your personal life, I think still that would probably not be a good idea to do much of that at work, except during your lunchtime or for free time. But really, I think that would send a bad message for the most part if you were doing a lot of Facebook activity or maybe any. In fact, some companies I think have filters where they don't, or firewalls where they don't allow some of these sites to even be used at work. I know a lot have YouTube restrictions, partly because of the distraction, but also because I think that they feel like if everybody's downloading videos, it's going to be a drain on their computer network.
This is kind of a two-part question. Do you think that millennials are going to change the workplace, or do you think that the workplace is going to change the millennials? And if the millennials do change the workplace, do you think that the integration of those traits like laziness and entitlement is going to negatively affect the economy in the long run?
That's a good question. First, in terms of the first thing, I think both. I think millennials are going to change the workplace, but they're also going to have to adapt to the workplace so that they will change. If they're going to succeed in the workplace, they'll have to make some changes. Some of the things I talked about. I don't think they're lazy. I think that's not a good word to use. That was a comment from a recruiter in the survey. Entitled, I do think a lot of this generation does feel entitled, that they feel that they do deserve a lot more than typically entry-level workers have expected in the past. I think that they'll have to get over it. If they're going to, I don't think companies are going to get that far. I think it's going to be a balancing act where companies try to be somewhat flexible, maybe let you listen to iPods at certain times if you're working on things that it would seem it would interfere with. So I think it's going to take a lot of flexibility on the part of both employer and employee to make this work. But I don't think that. I think the entitlement hopefully will go away over time, but I can't guarantee that. But I think feeling entitled in the workplace would not be a good thing for a manager. So if they became managers and had that feeling too, I don't think it would make for a good workplace environment.
I just had a kind of question for everybody since nobody raised their hand really with the how about your parents thing, but how many people's parents learn to like text message to communicate with you better? Because I know mine is, I kind of think that some people kind of have operating parents of some sort, because how many people learn to just write letters to communicate better with their parents, like via the mail and stamps?
Right. Well, I think. But do you think, I'm not sure if that would necessarily mean they were overactive or involved in mine, but I also think a lot of young people, at least in my experience, when I was doing the book, for example, I was trying to reach a woman who'd been an intern at FedEx and had gone back to college and interview her. And they gave me her email address and I sent out the email. I didn't hear anything, so I either figured she was too busy or wasn't interested, and I didn't no big deal. And about 2 weeks later, the FedEx guy called me and said, "Did you reach her?" And I said, "No, she just must not be interested in participating in the book." And he said, "Give me a few minutes." So we went on her Facebook page and found her, and she got in touch with me immediately, but she said she hadn't checked her email in weeks. So I think parents are finding that if they call on the cell phone and leave a voicemail, they're not going to get an answer if they're trying to find where their kid is in high school. So, or if they email them, they may not get an answer. So I think it's out of necessity almost that parents have learned to text. So I don't think it necessarily means that they're going to be helicopter parents. You do?
I would, just because it's like, I don't know, technology allows parents to communicate with their kids on a more frequent basis. Even if we're not calling our parents every week, you can shoot my dad a text or shoot my mom a text and communicate with them once more of a day.
So do you think it makes you more dependent on them for their advice and help?
That allows them to do the same thing, like, if you're not watching TV right now, if you're studying because I'm paying for your college,
Okay. So does nothing more intrusive.
You know, when you think about it, if you think about the generations earlier in which you had like a farm family and everyone lived on the farm, you always had sort of the hierarchy of, you know, the grandparents, the parents, the grandchildren, etc. I think that the technology today allows us to simulate the type of communications that were quite common then when the family bond was very strong. And I think that that's a very important thing, you know, to stay in contact because, you know, family is where they have to take you in. And so I think that the millennium is, you know, just a generation in which the technology and the cost of the technology has allowed us to stay in contact. Because when you and I went to college, long distance was very expensive.
That's true.
And many times when you were going back, this was when you called collect.
Yeah.
So you didn't get to talk to your parents, but when the operator said, will you accept a call? And they said no, then they knew that you had arrived safely at your destination. And so I think what we have is the advantage of technology that allows us to be more connected, which is almost the same as when you had a farm family with the generational passing the knowledge. I think the other thing that I think that we have to think about in terms of the critical thinking skills is the fact that with the rubrics, the checklist, that perhaps they haven't been used as they should in terms of here's a model for you to start learning how to develop your own critical thinking skills. In education, we haven't taken it the next step as to here's the model and here's how we came up with that model. And so now here's a pattern that you can use to begin to apply to a more ambiguous situation. And we just haven't quite made that next step to make the rubric say, okay, this is a good strategy for thinking and solving this particular problem, rather than, you know, just throwing it out and say, okay, let's see if you can guess what I thought you should do, and taking it to the next step, which would be to say, okay, at this point now, how would you apply this pattern to a situation that's slightly different but has some similar characteristics?
I think that's an excellent suggestion. I definitely do it, and I think it's a weaning process, you know, weaning from this dependence on, and it won't happen overnight, but doing things like that, I think is a great first step. And companies, I think, would really appreciate it because they're finding they're having to do it in the workplace, and it's a, you know, it's a cost to them. It's a training cost that they hadn't expected, I think. I think that's good. I love your story about the collect call. That was, you probably remember this or relate to it all, but this was the way it was. I remember so many times people would call and say they got to a destination and not talk.
$1 or so a minute. I
It
mean,
was
you know,
long distance used to be very expensive.
very.
I think I have time for more questions.
Okay.
You know, one thing that just reminded me when my daughter went away to school, one of the things I said to him was I need to know better this week. And the question is, I mean, actually, many of you never got a letter from your parents. And sometimes, you know, something like that, even though it seems archaic, she told me later on that was one of the nice things that she was looking forward to the week.
That's nice to hear, yeah. And I always heard this back, this was before I wrote about this generation even, but people would always tell me how much more a handwritten note meant to them, whether it was an employee or a personal situation, because I don't know, it just shows more, I don't know exactly why, but it's just more personal, shows more attention to the person. In fact, in a book I did on corporate reputation, the man who was CEO of a banking company out in New England, he said the first thing he does every day when he gets in is he writes a thank you note, personally written, handwritten on an email to one employee in the company, thanking them for something they did. But again, it was the importance of being handwritten. So I like that. One more?
The one attribute that shocked me most of your presentation was that government jobs are a high priority for the millennials. I think that was the one that caught me off guard the most.
Surprised you?
Yeah.
I think it goes back to the desire to be more service oriented, to do good for the world. I think that must be where it comes from. Because I know what's happening to what I call the generous generation, but I did find that most of the millennials really wanted to do something in their lives, preferably in their work, where they felt they were making a difference, not just at the company or whatever, but in the bigger world. There was one day when I remember interviewing who worked at one of the banks in New York, and she quit because she said, I felt like all I was doing was making rich people get richer. It just wasn't meaningful to me. So she didn't drop out of the corporate world. She went back out her MBA and ended up at a utility company working in renewable energy. She feels now, obviously, she's going to make a difference in terms of environmental impact. So, we out of time?
I'm Lou Karelski. I'm the director of the Monfort Executive Professor Program. The phrase "know thyself" was Socrates' guiding principle. And here we are thousands of years later, and the same concept. And it's only appropriate, I guess, with this is, I've been waiting for some 20 years with this as a backdrop. Because know thyself was also the inscription over the temple of Apollo in Delphi, Greece. So it's only appropriate that we have a description of the millennial generation to the millennial generation to know thyself. Mr. Alsop has been brought here through the office of the provost, and he's going to be speaking later this afternoon at 2:30 in the Panorama Lounge. Also as part of the series brought with the Executive Professor Program and the Office of the Provost at UNC. This topic this afternoon expands a little bit on this topic today, more than just know thyself, but the millennial generation in the workplace. The phrase or the topic has been OMG, my coworkers don't tweet. And how the millennial generation merges into the existing workplace. We encourage you to have an opportunity this afternoon for an expansion of Mr. Alsop's concept in the discussion today. He also has a book signing 1:30 in Fireside Lounge at the UC if you want to take a look at the book. A wonderful autograph. A week from Thursday, on November 19th, we're going to take the concept of knowing yourself a step further. And we have Chad McWhinney, who's coming in on November 19th, Thursday, from 12:30 to 1:45, talking about leadership styles and leadership skills that he would like to impart to you. Mr. McWhinney is a Colorado real estate developer. He is the owner and developer of Centera Center, for example, one of the projects that he has here in northern Colorado, and he's going to talk about some leadership skills. On behalf of the Monfort Executive Professor Program, Monfort College of Business, and the College of Business student body, we'd like to thank Mr. Alsop for being here today. We have a small plaque designating him as a Monfort Executive Professor Speaker, and thank you for coming.
I gotta go.